Welcome to the For You podcast, where we continue the conversations on the goings-on here at Fellowship Chapel. We are a church strategically located in the heart of Macomb County, right on the border of Sterling Heights and Warren. So we are for Macomb, we are for the world, and we are for you. So my name is Andrew, and I'm your host. I'm joined today behind the camera by Michael Kylo Renz, who's handling all of our audio-visual fun. And I'm also joined by Don Petty, an elder here at Fellowship Chapel and one of the members of our teaching team. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be with you today.
All right. Well, Don, you preached a few months ago talking about the reliability of Scripture. I have your notes here. It was a great sermon, a lot of great information. It was what I like to call, it was a meat sandwich of goodness. So I'm going to be a total geek boy today. This is like all in my wheelhouse, talking about the Bible, history, and all those things. But let's start with a really simple question. The reliability of the Bible.
Yes.
With everything going on in the world, why is this even an important topic to even bring up?
That's a great one to start with. So you're right. With all that's going on in the world today, it's so important because we as Christians, we look to the Bible for our answers. We would call it our authority. It's the basis for living. It's our basis for what we believe. I taught just recently at Detroit Bible Institute class in Teachings of Jesus. And I was just reviewing those the other day, just trying to go over some of the old notes and revise them a little bit. And Jesus made some big exclusive claims. He said, if you don't believe in me, you'll die in your sins. He said, I am the only way to the Father. And so with claims like that, Jesus made it clear that this is really important. I mean, for our life and even our eternal destiny. Well, with that in mind, how do we know that? Well, we know that from the Bible. And so how we live, what we believe, and even our eternal destiny is somehow based on the Bible. And if it's not reliable, then we're not sure where to go from there. It's foundational for what we believe.
Very good. All right, now you laid out like 5 key points from your outline. And for those of you that are interested, if you go into our YouTube channel and look for Don Petty teaching Is the Bible Reliable? It was about 3-4 weeks ago during what was the name of the series? The Questions of Faith. You'll find it there. Maybe we can throw a link on for it so people can click on it. So here are the 5 main points that you listed out as to how we know if the Bible is reliable. Here we go. Number 1, the unity of the Bible and the agreement of all the books. The dates that the New Testament books were written. The preservation of the Bible, which basically means that was where the manuscripts that we had before have lasted until now.
Yes.
Okay. Fulfilled prophecy and archaeology.
Yes.
Okay, so now obviously the 49 minutes that you preached this sermon with was not enough to go into enough detail.
Yes.
I knew for a while there you were flying through stuff. So
Yes.
based on questions you had from people or stuff you didn't get to cover, is there anything else you'd like to elaborate on any of those 5 topics?
Well, I basically blew through the last 2.
Okay.
So I took time to explain the others. The last 2 I really went through quickly. So fulfilled prophecy. Let's take that one. Without getting into a lot of the detail, there's lots of fulfilled prophecy in the Old Testament. That is things that prophets said was going to happen, and we know historically it did happen. And so we can date those books of the Bible and then look historically and in archaeological records and say these things did happen. We look in the Old Testament, there are at least 61 prophecies about Christ himself.
Okay.
And so mathematicians have said, for that many prophecies to come true about one individual, it's incalculable. So one guy said, okay, let's just take 8. If there are 8 specific things about one individual, what are the chances that those would all come to fruition? It would really work. So he gave the illustration. If you were to take the state of Texas and cover it with silver dollars 2 feet deep, and on one of those, you put an X. And then you put somebody and drop them by helicopter in Texas, blindfolded, and say, pick out that one. Those are the odds of just getting 8 of those correct. It's like 17 quadrillion, or we don't have a chalkboard to put all these zeros on there. So it's this huge number, and that's just 8 of them. And so the chances, the odds of somebody in the Old Testament predicting hundreds of years ahead of time all the things about where Christ was going to be born, and that he would live in Nazareth, and the birth, and the wise men coming, and all of these things. And a lot of people don't even know this, but there were 2 different towns. It could be in Nazareth or in Judea, of which place was it? They're very specific about where it was going to happen. So those are the kind of things that are pretty amazing. So the fulfilled prophecy is just one of those things that, if you really dig into it, it's one of those things you can't just chalk up to coincidence. So that was one. The other is archaeology.
Sure.
And once again, we don't want to go through just a ton of specifics during this time, but there have been so many things. I heard somebody just recently just had a list of things that were written about to prove that the Bible was not true or not accurate. And in the last 125 years, we have found all of those things to be true. And there were major things. King David, we talked about him, David and Goliath and all that. We couldn't find anything with his name on it. Or Pilate, the guy who condemned Christ to death, not mentioned anywhere. Well, guess what? They found all kinds of documents all of a sudden that included Pontius Pilate. And so for years, there were people that used archaeology and said, hey, the Bible is just not reliable because these people aren't out there. Well, and then we have found them. So I like good quotes by reliable people. And so there's one guy named William Ramsey. He was a student in Oxford. And the story for him was he was a skeptic, and he was a scholar in the languages and historically and archaeologically. And so he sought out to take the book of Luke. He said Luke was the most detailed and the most meticulous, so he's the guy. So we're going to take the book of Luke, and we're going to travel around and take his distances and the places that he quoted, and we're going to prove that the Bible is unreliable. And this is what he concluded. The book of Acts traces a lot of the stuff in Asia Minor written by Luke. Luke may be quoted as a trustworthy historical authority, and Luke is a historian of the first rank. He seizes the important and critical events and shows their true nature at greater length. In short, this author should be placed among the very greatest of historians. So he sought out to prove Luke was wrong, and he says, in his writings, I have one of the books at home, I've kept it for many years. He says, I was wrong. I was wrong in all of my assumptions, and he concluded that the Bible is accurate. One more quote from him. I set out to look for truth on the borderland where Greece and Asia met, and I found it there. The words of Luke stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment. The longer I study the New Testament, the more convinced I become of its absolute trustworthiness. Christianity is a religion of truth. It is founded on truth, absolute and perfect truth. So he couldn't emphasize it anymore, that the Bible is accurate and true and trustworthy.
Very good.
All right.
So, yeah, those were the 2 that I didn't get to. And again, we could talk about so many specifics about archaeology or the fulfilled prophecy, but literally there are books, big books, that you can get a hold of with all those details.
Now, there's some who've said recently, because we as a church have been going through with the Bible Buddies program, we're going through the Bible.
Sure.
And depending on which of the 2 cycles you're going through, you're either now finishing up around the book of Matthew, or some in the major prophet. I think it's around Ezekiel right now.
Yeah.
Now, there's some who would say that we as the modern church, modern believers, should focus and almost disregard the prophecies and things going on in the Old Testament and focus solely on the New Testament. Even some saying we're not Christians because we have a Bible, just we're Christians because of who Jesus is and what he did. What's your off-the-cuff reply to something like that? Now, hold on before you do it.
Yes.
As a reminder, the views expressed on the For You podcast are not necessarily those of Fellowship Chapel, its elders, or its staff, but I'm sure after the discussion, they will be.
Thank you for clarifying that. So first thought I have is people who make that statement, I go to Christ himself. What did Christ do? Christ looked at the Old Testament scriptures. He quoted them, even in 1 or 2 places, said very specifically, this is from God. He quoted the Old Testament as authoritative. When, again, I mentioned I had just taught teachings of Jesus not long ago and was looking over some of those things. And so some of the religious leaders came to him and said, so ask him about divorce and marriage and divorce. His response, first words out of his mouth were, well, what did the scriptures say? And he went back to Genesis 1 and 2. Can't go back any further than that. He went back to the very beginning of the Old Testament and talked about marriage as God intended it and said, man and a woman are brought together for life, and what God has put together, man shouldn't put asunder. So he quoted from the Old Testament. He said that's the way it was from the beginning. And even he quoted even some of the controversial things. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sure. He talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. He talked about Jonah. Jonah, real fish, real event. This is what happened. And that was a picture of his resurrection in 3 days. And so he even talked about some of the things that a lot of people are really critical of. So the fact that Jesus quoted the Old Testament and quoted it authoritatively, I don't know how you can get around that. Okay. One other thing, I heard this one not long ago from somebody else made mention of this. When Jesus was tempted, he could have, by his own authority, just told Satan to go away. He did that with the demons. Demons came, guy was demon possessed, and he just said, go. And they left. And so he's being tempted by the devil, and he could have just declared this to be and said, go away. But what did he do? He quoted the Old Testament. Every time Satan tempted him, he made a reference and quoted the Old Testament scriptures and said, based on that, you have no reason to be here. So I would say, I think we can't just dismiss the Old Testament. Jesus didn't do that. He thought it was very helpful.
So my understanding is the Old Testament written by different people at different times.
Yep.
It's all pointing towards the Messiah.
Yes.
Jesus and his arrival then was a fulfillment of the Old Testament expectation and the Old Testament law.
Yes.
So that's what we get the 4 different Gospels, Matthew's account, Mark's account, which is generally viewed as, I believe, Peter's account. Mm-hmm. Luke, who did research with Peter and all the other eyewitnesses. So Luke has got Luke in the Gospel of Acts, and then John, obviously.
Yes. And
then the epistles, the letters written by Paul and others, they're almost a commentary on the Gospel and on the Old Testament. So really, nothing should really be discarded. They should all be kind of viewed as a unity relating to each other then.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. In fact, that's one of the proofs, the first thing we mentioned there, the unity of the scriptures, all these different authors, and they complement each other so much. The Gospels, those historical accounts do, as well as, like you said, the writers of the epistles, what they said about what Jesus said they tied together so many things so well.
Very good. All right, well, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Hey everyone, this is Benet. Our church has had a great history of drama and musical productions, and this Palm Sunday, Dorothy House is bringing that back. We are having a musical called It Is Finished, and we need you. We are having auditions on October 7th and 8th. If you need more information, see Kevin Couch or Dorothy House.
All right, so now we are back. So now, Don, there's a few just really simple questions. Let's just try to get really, really practical.
Good.
Because we're talking about the Bible. You go into, back when they had them, a Christian bookstore. And you would see all the different kinds of Bibles.
Oh, yes.
All right. And then and also when you're talking to people, like, okay, I want to read the Bible, but what do I do? You know, like with the Bible Buddies, you start at Genesis, and boy, this is great. You get these stories. You get to Exodus. Ooh, that's good. And then you hit Leviticus.
Yes.
And all your forward momentum is just stopped. And then you do other stuff, and then you start losing it. And then you hit Song of Solomon, and suddenly you're interested again. And then, it ebbs and flows. So here's what we're going to do.
All right.
I basically just want an overview. What's the best way to read the Bible? And with all these different translations, why are there so many, and what's really the differences?
All right. When you approach the Bible, you have to remember that we are reading an ancient document. It doesn't seem that way because it's in English and it's been around for so long. People know it exists. But you have to think about, we're reading something that's really old. Now, maybe I'm the old guy, but when I was in school, I had to read Beowulf. If anybody remembers that, I can tell you right now, I had no clue what it was about. I don't remember it.
Beowulf, he's fighting Grendel. He's the wrestler.
And his mom.
This
is great
This
stuff.
is old English stuff. Well, you remember a lot more than I do. But anyway, this is
Who
old.
invited him? Who's our booker?
You guys both like Beowulf? Oh.
It's a good poem. It is.
Next thing he's going to say is the Lord of the Rings is overrated.
Oh, no.
Nah,
All right, I'm sorry. Continue on.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
All right.
So think of it this way. If you're reading something that's older, you need a little bit of help, a little bit of commentary on how to do this. So we encourage people, pick up and read the Bible. I really appreciate what we did this year with the Bible Buddies kind of thing. We had some videos that we had links to. Every time you got to a book of the Bible, you could get the overview. I like to use this illustration. It's kind of simple, but I'll take all the credit or blame, whatever it is. So let's say, Andrew, that Fellowship Chapel's not that old, but we're doing some construction around here, and we want to tear down a wall. And inside the wall, you find page 2 of a letter. And it details that there's some really important documents and they need to get to the leadership and that this is critical that it happens. And that's all you know. You don't have the first page, so you don't know who wrote it, when it was written. The last page, you don't have but it's like, this is important. Something needed to happen, but we don't know. Now, what are the questions that you might ask to try to figure out about that document? I kind of hinted at them.
All right. So how old is it? When was the wall made?
Yeah.
Who might know who was here at the time that we could ask on it? Is there anything that we know already that happened during that time frame? Like, some big drama that happened.
Yep.
What do you think? What am I missing? What else would we need to know to ask questions to figure out?
I kind of hinted at it. Who wrote it?
Who wrote it?
Who is it written to? Now, this is a good illustration because I think some people do this when they read the Bible. So we could take that letter and say, well, documents are probably from a lawyer and the leadership, probably the leadership of the church. And you know what? That might be right. But the fact is, you don't know. And a lot of people, they pick up the Bible and they look at it and say, this is what I think it means. And they don't take the time to say, who wrote this book? When was this book written? Who is it written to? What was going on at the time? Somebody said the epistles are situational. When you think about it, that's a great statement. Every one of those is written to a church with specific things going on that got addressed. So the question is, who wrote that? When did they write it? Who'd they write it to? What was going on at that church when he wrote it? And so those are the kind of questions. And a lot of people just read it and look for a verse. There's a good verse to put on a mug. I like that verse.
Just remember, I can do all things through a verse taken out of context.
Well, I have a question.
Yes, Michael.
So you go to a Bible store or a Christian bookstore, you get a book. How do you find out that context? Because, it just starts chapter 1. It doesn't always give you that in depth unless you go maybe get like a study Bible. So, for the average Joe that's like, I got my mom's old Bible, I'm dusting it off and I want to start to know Jesus. How are you supposed to avoid those pitfalls, if you will, of pulling things out of context?
I think you kind of hinted at it. My recommendation is that all Christians get a good study Bible because that's a great place to start. Now, if in the newer generation and high-tech stuff, you can get really cool things, those videos we talked about, where people will describe the whole book. And I love that. Personally, I've learned this about myself. When I take a class, if the instructor just dives in and piece by piece by piece, I'm saying, come on, give me the big picture and then break down the pieces. So I love things that give me an overview. So I think a great place is a good study Bible. We live in a world now with the resources, they're all online. And of course, you can order them off of Amazon, and christianbook.com is my favorite go-to spend too much money place. But there are resources that you can buy. And maybe those are in book form, but a good study Bible will set you up with, and they're all basically the same kind of information. Who wrote it? Who they're writing to? What was going on at the time? And when you think about it, it's back to one of the previous questions, the beginning of the Old Testament was thousands of years before Christ, and the New Testament was when Christ was here and up to 100 years or so after Christ. So even the ancient world, we're talking about thousands of years difference in what was going on in the Old Testament to the New Testament culture and who was in charge and all those things. So it's so typical and so easy. It's normal for us to just think about, we think like 21st century Americans, and that's normal. I mean, and I was sharing with Andrew several weeks ago. I ran into another thing in the Bible, and I thought that particular word or phrase, I just never thought about it in the context of the Bible. Because, just take the simplest little thing. You read about, they went into their house. And what do? We picture our house. Well, houses in Jewish culture were way different materials and all kinds of things. And there are simple little things where it talks about, going to the, I can't remember the verse now, but about going up to the roof. And it's like, why would I want to go up to the roof? I'm picturing my shingled roof while they had flat roofs with an outside staircase to get up there and enjoy the breeze in the evening. Well, if you've never heard that, you're thinking like an American instead of thinking about what that means. And again, that doesn't change any biblical doctrine, but that's an illustration of we read the Bible like we think, and what we need to do is we need to learn. So some of those background things, I always tell people one of the things, if you got extra time, read about culture, what they ate, what the kind of food, the kind of dress, everything about their culture helps you picture what it was like in Bible days as opposed to how I think.
Gotcha. So now I used to work at a bookstore years ago.
Yep.
And when we'd be selling Bibles to people, because people would ask, and I'd always ask questions, okay, now, who is this for? What's the goal of it?
Yeah.
So if you're doing there's different types of translations for the English Bibles. There is, there's dynamic equivalents where they take what the words are and the equivalent to what it would be today. I think the NIV is an example of this. You know, do you use the word torch? Do you use the word flashlight? They're paraphrase Bibles.
Yes.
There are basically literal word for word as close as you can to translate them.
Right.
You know, we here at the church at Fellowship, we use the New Living Translation for Sunday morning preaching, and the ESV is what we had used before that, and we still kind of use that for study. If you have somebody who's a new believer and they're looking for that first thing to start, what do you think would be good for them to start with?
I would start with the New Living. That's why we use it here.
Okay.
New Living Translation is easy to read. It is one of the things you got to remember about a dynamic equivalence. The goal is the meaning, yet what people don't realize is sometimes that adds interpretation to it. And so they've done some interpreting for you, and you might not even realize it. But that's okay if your goal is to just read through it for meaning.
All right.
Now, if you want to dig in and study yourself, that's why we go with the ESV. ESV is as literal as possible,
Okay.
but it's also pretty readable. I mean, it's up there pretty high on readability. One of the things, again, I heard several years ago that really impacted me. When you study one of those versions that's more literal, more word for word, you get nuance. You get nuances of meaning that you lose because they say some of these easier to read ones are like the newspaper or even a little less than that, 6th grade or something like that. So the main thing you're going to drop off is vocabulary.
Okay.
Keep things as simple as you can and don't use any big words. Well, you lose nuance in that and some words. Let me give you an illustration. Again, this class I just taught not long ago. There's a parable Jesus had about a friend who came at midnight, and somebody came, and he was the point is persistence in prayer. And so I was reading it in the ESV, and the word I would use off the cuff is persistence in prayer. And I got to the word, and the word in the ESV was impudence. Dude, impudence? I'm no dummy, but I can't remember ever using that word.
What does impudence even mean?
So that's what I said. I told my class this. I said, what's that? So I went and looked it up, and the word was persistence with boldness. And I said, ooh. And the word that came to my mind was, that's great nuance. I would have used the word persistence, but it adds it there. And then, so this
Don't
is what...
be impudent.
So this is what happens to me. So I go digging around and comparing translations. So I went, looked around, and one of the translations said bold audacity. And I thought, ooh, now that gives you, again, a little different picture. Persistence, yeah, okay, come on. Knock and keep on knocking. That's persistence. But this was a little bit more bold than that. Somewhat, even audacity to say, I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna be here until you give me what I want. That's the picture there of prayer. And I thought, wow, that was pretty cool. So that one word really turned a light bulb on for me. So again, those are the things that happen when you study and you get into one of those versions that gives you a little bit more to dig into.
Okay. Now to kind of piggyback on that, when you're reading it, because you'll hear different things in the ether about, how you should read the Bible and how you should take it. Because whenever people get into, let's just say different believers who interpret things differently,
Yeah.
they bicker with each other about how they're interpreting things.
Yeah.
So there's, I believe, a literal interpretation where when you're reading it, what it says is what it says.
Yes.
Should you read the Bible literally? Should you read the Bible allegorically? Where some of it's like, well, this wasn't really talking about this, it's really talking about this. Or is there some combination of those? Because obviously there's different types of books in the Bible. What would you think would be the best advice to give on how to view the Bible when you read it?
A couple pieces of advice. First of all, I think Christians sometimes can be guilty. I don't know if this is my word or somebody else's, but we spiritualize. One of the best examples I ever heard was David and Goliath. He goes out to kill Goliath. He picked up 5 smooth stones, and I read a commentary one time. Well, what do those 5 stones represent? David went out and he got the victory. So there must be 5 things that we need to get victory in our Christian lives. And it turned into this whole thing, and it's like, no. David went, these are the facts. He picked up 5 stones. Maybe they were the right size. Maybe that's how big his pouch was. But there was not some spiritual thing there about why he picked up 5 stones. So people take all kinds of things and try to make some spiritual thing out of it. So I would warn against that. My advice is you take the Bible literally unless there's a reason not to.
Okay.
So we take it for what it says, but when Jesus said, I am the door, obviously that's a metaphor. He wasn't made out of wood with a doorknob right there. So there's a metaphor. He said, you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. Okay, what do we do with that? So we have to do some little interpreting. What did he mean when he said that? So then we have to look for meaning. But we take it literally. Things that happen, especially historical events and stories and things like that, those things happened unless there's a reason not to. Even the writings of John to Revelation, those are obviously some of the visions that he had. You know, of an animal that had hair of a woman and teeth like a lion and a tail of a scorpion. Obviously, he's trying to describe something, so take that literally. But that's just big picture. Take it as it is. Unless there's a reason why it doesn't make sense like that, and okay, now we have to look for meaning from there.
Very good. All right. Was there anything else from this topic that you think we should hit on, or anything you'd like to elaborate more on?
I don't think so. I think that's good for now. My encouragement is, I'll just tell you where I am. I have an ESV.
Okay.
ESV study Bible. I like that. It's got just tons of resources there.
He just stole one of the questions for the rapid fire, but let's not focus on that. Carry on, ESV.
Yes, ESV. Great one, great study Bible, great version. If you want to just read through and easy to read, New Living Translation.
Okay.
I've got 2 in the middle. Christian Standard Bible
Okay.
is one of my other favorites, and the Net, New English Translation.
Okay.
Now, that one's got a lot of technical notes at the bottom, so I'm kind of a geek when it comes to all that. But the Net, it's very readable. It's still good.
Very good.
I would throw those in the middle
Okay.
of it. And then one other one, just to throw out there, is the Amplified.
Okay.
They did revise that recently. It used to be pretty meticulous is not the right word. It's just repetitious of things over and over again. And it's unique in that it doesn't have any notes at the bottom, but it tries to put right in the text, and it's clear. This is what the Bible says, but they put in parenthesis things that are there to help the literal meaning of the word, and then it puts in brackets anything that's kind of a commentary. So it's clear this is added, but why? But they try to just make it, you're reading on through it and you can see it. So I always pick that up sometimes just to do a read on a passage of scripture.
Very
so
good.
That's where I like to go.
Very good. No KJV? You don't like the these and the thithers?
No, I'm done with the saith and goeth.
No Passion Translation.
There's a lot of them out there. Very good. All right, well, let's transition to a segment that we like to call rapid fire.
Oh.
All right, I'm going to ask you just some rapid fire questions.
Oh,
A
boy.
lot of these are off the cuff. Don't put a lot of thought into them.
I haven't gotten these ahead of time, so here we go.
That's right. All right, here we go. Favorite beverage?
Ooh. Coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah.
All right. Do you like straight black or you do cream sugar? What do you do?
Cream. No sugar.
Do.
Coffee and cream.
All right, here we go. He's still to another. Favorite English translation of the Bible?
ESV.
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 All right.
I like it.
Favorite sport to watch on television?
Football.
Football. Any
Yep.
team in particular?
Oh, got to go with the Lions. It's a good year for the Lions.
Wait a minute. You mean as of this recording, the 1-0 Detroit Lions?
Undefeated
That's right. The undefeated.
and against Super Bowl champions.
That's right, the reigning. They're not defending because it's not like a champion. They're the reigning champions that we defeated.
Ah, yes.
Very good. Hopefully this comes out, we'll be 2-0 or 3-0.
That's
I
right.
just think we should rename Fellowship like the Fellowship Pride, or start like our own football league, because it is football, football, football. And this,
The coach, the nickname he has from some of the national guys is Motor City Dan Campbell. I think we should nickname our pastor Motor City Robert Wend.
I like it.
We'll call him Captain Kneecaps.
Yes.
We had a little side thing going. What was the over/under on how many times the Lions' victory was going to be mentioned on the Sunday service? I only heard one.
Yeah, I was.
I only heard one.
There were a couple references, though.
There were.
There was it over/under 3?
Maybe we should use a lions for our logo somehow.
We should figure that out.
That could work.
That could work.
Just in the background.
That could. All right, here we go. All right.
Yes.
What book are you reading right now?
I got a couple going right now. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
I read that back in grad school a long time ago.
Okay.
Thought I'd revisit that. And What Every Christian Should Know, Basic Bible Doctrine. You handed me that one.
Oh, that's right. That's a good book, isn't it?
It is a good book. So I've started working my way through that. I actually like that title, What Every Christian Should Know. I read an article like that years ago, and I'm always thinking, what are the basics? How do we boil it down? So I like to read those kind of books every once in a while.
Okay, so here's a fun question.
Okay.
So when you read a book, a Christian book or anything, do you read it with a very critical eye the first time through, or do you view it with a very open, fully accepting eye? Because I always tease, sometimes the Christian books you see on the shelves at the big box stores, you start reading through the theology, you're like, I don't know if I'd want to read that.
Yeah.
So when you're first reading through a book, do you have a critic on your shoulder reading it, or how do you approach a book when you're reading it?
Pretty much open if I know who I'm reading.
Okay.
These guys, I know who they are. Like we talked about with the Bible. Okay, context. What's this book about? So I look up the author. I want to know who this guy is. I've not heard of him. Oh, he's a Dallas guy and that kind of thing. Okay, I think it's a good book. So usually I'm pretty open unless I really don't know who I'm reading.
Very good. All right. What song are you listening to on a loop right now? Or if you're not listening to music, what podcast are you listening to?
I was going to say, I've not listened to much music. I get stuck on the podcast. So favorite podcast, Think Biblically. Again, I just like that. That's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be thinking. And the tagline is think biblically about everything. Nah, that's a no-brainer. So I like that one. And then that's kind of led me to some other ones, kind of apologetic things about defending our faith. Elisa Childers, Frank Turek is a good guy. The two of them and one other gal do some conferences together. So Frank Turek's biggest one is I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That'll take you to a lot of good content right there.
Very good. All right, here you go. There's the hardest one of the podcast. Ran this one. We didn't give it to the pastor last time, but you're getting it.
Oh, okay.
Who wrote the book of Hebrews?
Well, the answer is I have no idea. I don't know. I have a few ideas. If it was Luke, he wrote lots of the New Testament, and that's a possibility. I think Apollos is way up there in my mind. He fits the category. See, and the reason Luke and Apollos fit so well is it appears that the writer of Hebrews didn't know Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So think about it. He's writing to Hebrew people. So if it was Paul, he was an expert in Hebrew. But the writer of Hebrews, writing to Hebrew people, used Greek, not most of the time, all the time. So personally, I don't think it was Paul. Maybe Luke, maybe Apollos.
I heard Dr. James White, an apologist. He gives his educated opinion is Hebrews was preached by Paul, written down by Luke. It's Paul's doctrine, but it's Luke's writing. And I was like, ooh, that's nice.
Yes.
That's like, thread the needle there.
Well, and most people think the writer of Hebrews was a close associate of Paul. Mm-hmm. So he was associated with Paul, but don't think that Paul wrote it. So I would agree.
Very good. All right, here you go.
Possibility.
And here's the last one.
Oh.
This is the easiest one that you've had.
Oh.
Of all of your son-in-laws, which one is your favorite?
Oh. Andrew, you are my favorite oldest son-in-law.
Spoken like a true dad.
Yeah, that's right.
I will accept
That's what you
it.
got to do. What you got to do.
All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the For You podcast. If you do us a favor and if you like this content, please like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas for any future guests or topics you'd like covered, please just put them in the comment section and we'll look at them there. And we'll see you next time.